Good evening and Happy New Year. Welcome to the Planning Commission. Tonight is Monday, January 8th, 2024. Iris, will you please call the roll?
Stewart.
Here.
Scanoni. Here. Mitchell.
Here.
Rigby. Here. Najak.
Here, virtually.
Moreno. Here. Twing. And Councillor Maboop is also present.
Right. Thank you. So yes, it looks like we have a new councilor liaison for this year. So welcome, Councillor Maboop, and please go ahead with your update.
Hello. Oh, thank you, Chair Stewart. I'm glad to be here again, 2 years after my first service here. Today is my birthday. I would like to be excused after I had.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yes, feel free.
Yeah, the boss is waiting for me at the restaurant, I think I'm very happy to be in this, institution that's really very important for our city. We know all you're doing, all the wonderful things, in spite of all the difficulties we can have from neighbors, but thank you for your work. And we are going to our goal setting, and we saw what you write about the goal setting. The city received all that, and Thursday we have all the commissions, and I would be very happy to hear more about what you folks are saying there. So right now, what I think and all this I'm saying you already know, that we have, the urban forest plan. It's something that's very important for Planning Commission, and the housing production strategy is one of the best. Like, honestly, the planning department has done a work that's so extraordinary, wonderful, that we all were very amazed of the job they did, and it's kind of blazing the trail for us to see what we can do with all the requirement by the state, and also with everything we are doing for affordable housing. We all know that housing is a problem in Lake Oswego for, access for some of our folks, our children coming out of college or everything. So these are very important, and I'm sure you know about the housing that's starting in full swing right now with Habitat. We did the ribbon cutting over there not long ago, and today we did the ribbon cutting of our bridge. So we also, talk about the last council, about the unsung heroes. We talked about other important thing that also I'm pretty sure you are seeing. It's the North Anchor project, and you are also and also what is going on, that we have a decision by the DRC last, when was it? 2 days ago? No, last week. Yeah. About, the park and all the things that are around it. So I think that's all I have. Not that I want to rush it, but that's it. If you have questions, I would be happy to ask anything.
Commissioners, any questions? We'll send you off to enjoy your evening then.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the approval of meeting minutes from our last two meetings. First one we'll consider is the minutes for November 27th, 2023. May I have a motion or discussion?
I make a motion to approve as presented, the November 27th, 2023 minutes.
Okay, get a second? A motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. And then the minutes for December 11th, 2023.
I make a motion to approve the minutes of December 11, 2023 as presented.
Okay, we have a motion approved. Do we have a second? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, and
Aye.
I will abstain because I was not there, so motion carries anyway. And then moving on to public comment, I've got a couple notices from neighborhood associations to read to you. The first one is for the Lakewood Neighborhood Association meeting, which will be Monday, January 22nd from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. downstairs at the Lakewood Center of the Arts. And any questions on that meeting, contact Peggy Friedel-Yee, the neighborhood co-chair, at Peggy, PEGGYFY@mac.com. And then the second announcement is for the Lake Forest Neighborhood Association. They will be having a general meeting at 7 p.m. on Thursday, January 25th, and they'll be preceded by an appetizer and dessert potluck that starts at 6:30 p.m., and that is at the Lake Oswego Adult Community Center. All right, and that is all for the announcements. Iris, do we have any public comment for issues not on the agenda?
No, we do not.
Thanks. All right, then we will move on to get an update on the housing needs and production strategies. The Plan Commission will receive a presentation with an update on the recent Housing Production Strategy Task Force meeting and other progress related to the city's work to develop a housing production strategy. And we've got Jessica here to start things off.
Thank you, Commissioners, and good evening. I will be filling in for Planning Manager Olson tonight, as well as on January 22nd, as he is currently on parental leave. So they're awaiting the birth of his son at any time now, so that's exciting news for him. I am joined tonight by Kate Rogers with MIG, and she's up on your screen virtually. And before I turn it over to her for the presentation, the purpose of your meeting tonight is an update. So there's no action that's requested from the Planning Commission tonight, but the last time we had a check-in with you on the housing production was in mid-November. That was your last meeting on that. So we're taking this opportunity to let you know the work that's been done since your last meeting. And we're also following up on some information that was requested by the Commission last time on the construction excise tax as a funding source for affordable housing. So we'll also go over that tonight for you. I do want to point out that included in your packet was the final contextualized housing needs assessment report. And just as a reminder, this is a report that basically connects the findings of the housing needs analysis and connects it to the forthcoming analysis of the housing production strategies. And it describes things like demographic housing and market conditions, housing affordability issues, barriers to meeting identified housing needs, and also existing or prior programs implemented to address housing needs in the city. We are not going to be going over this report tonight because the major findings of that report were already presented to the Commission, but we just wanted to let you know and see the final report since it is now available. And so as far as the agenda for this evening, Kate will be providing an overview of the strategy alternatives. And these strategy alternatives have been condensed down a bit based upon feedback from the Planning Commission, the City Council, as well as the task force. And then she will talk about how construction excise tax works, provide feedback from the task force that we received at their last meeting, which was in early December. And then she'll pass it off to me for next steps, and we'll talk about the project schedule going forward. And before I pass it over to Kate, are there any questions before we begin? Okay. It's all you, Kate.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. And good evening, Planning Commission. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to give just a really high-level overview of the strategy alternatives. You'll see in your packet there are several tables that kind of summarize a little bit more information about all of these strategies that are currently being considered by the HPS task force. And that includes, some kind of trade-offs, pros and cons, a little bit of information about each strategy, what type of housing need each one is kind of working towards meeting, and what sort of at a high level, what actions would be needed to implement in order to move forward on each of these strategies. So I'm not going to go through each of these strategies, really just kind of going to talk about how we've been discussing them with the task force, and also just sharing kind of the feedback that we've heard from you all, from City Council, and from the task force on each of these strategies. That's kind of helping us kind of sort through them, refine them a little bit, and eventually we'll be prioritizing these and further refining them for the final housing production strategy. So the first group of strategies on your screen here are the strategies that you all reviewed at your last work session or study session back in November. And so these are strategies that would require some type of council action, whether that's, adoption through ordinance or resolution or some type of approval by City Council. But these are also strategies that have the potential for a higher impact on housing production than many of the other strategies that are being considered. So these are things that we wanted to bring to you all and to City Council, earlier in the process to kind of give a sense of whether you kind of support the strategies and start to talk about them a little bit more. So you'll see that each of these strategies that are still on the screen here received some level of support from all three groups, with the exception of the construction excise tax, which got sort of a lower amount of support from all three. But because this is something that you all were interested in kind of hearing more about and getting a little bit more of information on, we wanted to bring some more of that back to you. And also just recognizing that a lot of the other strategies, or at least a handful of the other strategies related to affordable housing specifically, are kind of dependent on some revenue that the city doesn't currently have. So construction excise tax is one of the few potential sources of locally controlled funds to support affordable housing really directly. So I think it's, we've decided as a team that it's worth keeping in the mix, even though it hasn't been, unanimously supported so far. Yeah, so that's this set of strategies. And I do want to point out these strategies that we've kind of taken off the list for now. These were also presented to you all back in November as, higher impact strategies that need council approval. And these basically all received pretty low support from you, from council, and from the task force, to a varying degree from the task force. So the first one is the medium or minimum density requirements for to-be annexed land. So that's requiring kind of a certain level of higher density for a land that's brought into city limits that's currently within the urban growth boundary. And I think this strategy was it's a little bit confusing how it would be implemented and how it would work, and maybe didn't have as much potential for for a big impact on housing production. And I think that's maybe why it received a lower level of support. But we, as a team, we kind of talked about this and realized it could be kind of incorporated into the rezoning strategy, which you'll see on your next slide. Because really, instead of as kind of a separate process that upzones areas or, increases density for areas that are potentially going to be annexed, it would really be kind of redesignating them on the zoning map at a higher density. So, rezoning them to a higher density zoning designation. So I think as part of the rezoning strategy, if that were to move forward, that would be one of the potential, recommendations or considerations in implementing that rezoning strategy. The infrastructure planning strategy was really, it's kind of a higher level, sort of longer range planning strategy that, the city already does to some extent. The city factors in, future residential growth in its infrastructure planning. And this would have been kind of a more targeting infrastructure improvements to specific areas to better support residential development, over the longer term. But I think because, it's a longer term strategy, it potentially has sort of a lower impact and a more long-term impact. And especially given that sort of the timeline of the housing production strategy is sort of it's an 8-year time frame for implementation. So I think this one makes sense to kind of continue doing what the city is doing, but not necessarily make this one of the kind of core implementation actions. And then general obligation bonds, this one also got low support. And this one, just because it requires voters to approve a new bond for housing, would really be pretty challenging to get support for and to implement in that way. So these have been taken off the list for now. That's not to say they couldn't be brought back on if someone, or there was agreement that these were really important, or folks changed their minds about it. But for now, we're kind of taking them off the list of strategies to keep evaluating. So the next kind of bucket of strategies are ones that have already, existing support. Either City Council has already kind of taken some action or included these in their plans, or received some degree of support from the Planning Commission or the task force or other advisory bodies, or things that the city is already kind of implementing to some extent. So these include accessible design incentives or mandates. So these are strategies to either encourage or require some amount of kind of universal design or accessible design for new housing units. Removing or reducing minimum parking requirements. This is something that the city is required to do, at least to some extent, as part of the climate friendly and equitable communities rules from the state. And so this would be potentially kind of expanding that citywide, or considering ways to implement that in a way that really supports housing development. Tax increment financing is something obviously the city is already doing, and there are opportunities that have kind of already been identified to expand urban renewal to new parts of the city. So that's something that I think we would probably include as a recommendation for potential new TIF districts. And then public-private partnerships. Again, this is something that the city has already pursued for some of the recent affordable housing projects that are underway. And so I think this is, again, something that has already been done, and we can include recommendations for how to kind of move these forward in the future. And then strategies that were kind of included in the lower priority list for discussion are ones, or include ones that really, again, would depend on a new funding source, a new revenue source that the city doesn't currently have. So these are all ways that those types of funds could be spent, including, creating a new fund to support housing that could be sort of a flexible fund, giving low interest loans, or some type of revolving loan fund, community land trusts, which support affordable home ownership, and strategies to preserve existing low cost housing. So really, without a new revenue source, these strategies would be very challenging to implement, and probably wouldn't be able to move forward on them. So that's why we've kind of included them in a lower priority for discussion bucket. But if the city were to consider, a new funding source like CET, then these could be maybe incorporated as sort of supporting strategies for that. And then the last bucket of strategies are ones that might have sort of a lower impact on actual housing production. Not to say they're not important, but might not have, the capacity to create as many housing units or preserve as many housing units as some of the other strategies. But they potentially have kind of a lower barrier to implementation. Maybe they wouldn't require as much, new funding, or they wouldn't necessarily require, council action or voter approval, things like that. So these are things that, could be considered as part of the housing strategy, but maybe wouldn't be really high priority actions, or maybe they might be some sort of longer term actions. So these include pre-approved plan sets to kind of facilitate development of accessory dwelling units or middle housing types, fair housing policy and education, which includes kind of a range of strategies to support fair housing outcomes in the city. And then an affordable housing preservation inventory, which would really just kind of be one step in a larger strategy to preserve existing lower cost housing. So that's all I have for the kind of overview of the housing strategy alternatives. Before I move on to talk more about CET, I just wanted to see if anyone has questions or comments about what we've talked about.
I think we can move on.
Okay, great. All right, so a little more information about construction excise tax, just so you have kind of a better sense of how it works and how other cities are implementing it. So it is a one-time tax on new construction projects. And this is a kind of a state authorized potential funding program specifically for affordable housing. And the tax rate for residential construction is limited to 1% of permit value. For commercial and industrial construction, there's no limit on the tax rate that cities could apply. And then the use of the CET funds is kind of dictated, or at least guided or defined by state statute to some extent. It's a little more structured for residential CET as opposed to commercial and industrial CET, which is a little more flexible. And so for residential, around half of the funds need to be used for developer incentives. 35% is pretty flexible, but does need to be used for some type of affordable housing programs. And then 15% goes to the Oregon Housing and Community Services, or OHCS, for home ownership programs specifically. But OHCS does have a policy to spend those funds on the cities they kind of pay into the CET pot of money. And then for commercial and industrial, similar to residential, the 50% need to be used for housing related programs or, supporting incentives, things like that. And then the rest is unrestricted. So just to point that out, and for commercial and industrial, you don't even need to necessarily spend all of the funds on affordable housing per se, as long as it's going towards housing programs. And then the rest you can kind of do what you wish. So that's kind of the structure of the program. Just wanted to point out some of the options and ways that it can be kind of customized for Lake Oswego if you were interested. Obviously, the commercial, or excuse me, you have the choice of applying it to residential development, or to commercial and industrial, or to all types of development. So that's one option there. City, of course, can choose the tax rate. So up to 1% for residential, unlimited for commercial and industrial. And then cities can also choose to exempt certain types of development if they want to make sure that certain types are, not sort of burdened by additional, cost of construction. Some types of development are already exempted by state law. So affordable housing development, public buildings, things like residential care facilities, those are all exempted already. I think hospitals is on the list. But the city could choose to add other types of development. And you'll see in a moment that cities have chosen various types of development to exempt. So we put together just a sort of high level summary, a sampling of programs in a variety of cities that we were kind of aware of their programs in Oregon. So you see that the percentage of CET ranges from let's see, 1/3% in Bend up to 1% in Milwaukee, Newport, and Tigard. So that's, I would say, 1% for both residential and commercial. Excuse me, commercial and industrial is pretty typical, but anywhere in that range. I don't know of any examples of cities that have gone above 1%, but I don't know the details of every city's program. And you can see that, Tigard exempts quite a few types of development, including accessory dwelling units that are small, relatively small, kind of lower value projects under 50,000. They do exempt, in particular, residents that are destroyed, by fire or other sort of unintentional means. And they also exempt certain types of middle housing exempted from 75% of the CET. So they'd only have to pay 25%, or I guess 1/4% for the permit value. And then City of Eugene also exempts kind of projects under a certain value, 20 or 250,000. Actually, that's the sale price, so it's a little bit different, but homes that are sold for kind of a moderate cost. And they also exempt projects that participate in the multi-unit property tax exemption, or MUPT program. And then City of Milwaukee also exempts projects valued under a certain amount. And for the first 5 years of their program, they exempted accessory dwelling units, but that kind of exemption program has been phased out at this point. And then just to point out, there are several other cities that have also adopted a CET, and there are probably other ones on this list. I just haven't been able to find kind of a comprehensive list out there to point to, but as you can see, several cities have gone this route. So that's all the information we put together, just kind of brief overview of CET and how it's been used in other places. So wanted to see if folks had any questions or thoughts about this strategy.
Kate, is there a minimum tax rate or just a maximum?
As far as I know, there's no minimum. There's nothing defined in state statute. I think you would want to set some kind of minimum to, to be able to accrue as much, enough revenue to be meaningful. And that's actually another piece I should point out, that we are doing a little bit more sort of analysis of CET's revenue potential specific to Lake Oswego, and looking at the past projects over the last, I think, 5 or 10 years, to look at what your sort of average annual total permit value is. And then you could get a sense of, if you did a 1% tax, this is the kind of revenue you could expect, or 0.5%, et cetera.
Thank you, Kate.
Oh, I was just going to ask you if you had any questions, because I can't see you, Rachel. So go ahead.
Thank you. Yep. My question was, some of these cities have had these programs for a couple years now. Do we have any data on if they've been able to meaningfully use these funds to support any specific projects in their city? I think it would be helpful if we saw an example of the city adopted this. They were able to gather up, $100,000 or $500,000 for a specific project. And because the city had this fund, they were able to come in and close a gap on a project that otherwise wouldn't be feasible, or it made them rank higher in priority for state funding. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, we did include some information in the supplemental memo that was included in your packet. I know it was a really long packet. I think it started at page 126 of the PDF.
Okay.
So for a couple of these cities, there was information available about how they've been able to use their CET revenues. And let's see. So the city of Eugene, they adopted their program in 2019. And let's see. I have information for fiscal year 2021 and 2022. So in 21, the CET generated $300,000 in revenues. And in 2022, it generated over $1 million in revenues. So pretty productive there. And they, let's see. I don't have specific details about specific programs or projects that Eugene's money has supported, but I know their website, they have like annual reports and information on their website, so you could take a look there. But they do talk about the types of uses of their funds. So that includes gap financing for development of housing. They've used it to acquire existing housing units to make it permanently affordable. Acquiring land for future affordable housing projects, down payment assistance for home buyers, and rental or security deposit assistance. So that's a little bit of information, but yeah, I know they have more online. And then looks like City of Milwaukee, as of 2022, they had accumulated $2 million in revenue so far over the last, I guess it would have been about 5 years to that point. So pretty significant. And it looks like Milwaukee, I think as of 22, I mean, this is all mostly pulled from the internet. So all I have is kind of what's available publicly. But it looked like they were putting out a sort of an RFP for using those funds in Milwaukee.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Looks like we don't have any other questions on that section.
Okay. All right. So moving on to give kind of a brief summary of the feedback that we heard at the last HPS task force meeting. And at that meeting, they received the same information about the strategy alternatives, the same set of tables that you all received in your packet. And then we had kind of an open discussion and breakout sessions at that meeting. And so we broke up the breakout groups into 4 different categories of housing need. So the first one was government subsidized units affordable for people with either very low or low incomes. So those are households that earn up to 80% of the area median income. The next group was units affordable to sort of more moderate income households. So those are 80 to 120% of AMI. The next group was just talking about housing options and choices in general. So choices to meet a full range of needs and preferences. And then the last group talked about specific opportunities for seniors, aging in place, and people with disabilities. So those were the 4 different categories of housing need to kind of break it up. And we asked folks to think about which strategies they thought would be most effective at meeting those needs. If they had any thoughts or questions or concerns about how those strategies would be implemented, and then what types of partners or organizations they thought the city should be working with or thinking about partnering with to implement the strategies. So on the government subsidized units, and they talked about the importance of land being donated just because it's so costly in Lake Oswego. So that's really critical. They also talked about potential rezoning as an important strategy, given sort of the lack of land available, especially for multifamily or higher density housing. They also talked about code amendments being pretty critical. They pointed out that zoning can be pretty restrictive in some cases, especially things like height limits and design standards, which are very specific and kind of add to costs and limit design options and the ability to kind of maximize opportunities on a site. We talked about CET. There were kind of mixed opinions on CET. Folks talked about how it could be used to support development incentives that could, support affordable housing through, things like SDC exemptions and other means, maybe tax abatements. But there were some concerns about the fact that this strategy does add cost to development and, could potentially have a negative impact on not on affordable housing development, but on other types of development in the city. For the next group, which talked about moderate income housing, they also mentioned code amendments as an important strategy. They thought that could have a big impact. They did have express concerns about adding more flexibility, say allowing taller buildings or larger buildings, and how that could potentially, negatively impact neighbors on adjacent properties. They also brought up rezoning and thought that could have a big impact, especially with kind of the shift away from office uses and how those are, less desirable, not always fully occupied these days, and potentially, rezoning areas zoned for office or commercial uses for residential. But again, there are concerns about potential sort of incompatible uses in a or within the same area or in close proximity to each other. So that would be an important consideration for implementation. And then they also talked about the SDC fee schedule strategy and how modifying the schedule to kind of scale the fees based on the size of a unit to kind of right size the fee to the sort of impact that the unit would have based on the occupancy, how that could really benefit all types of housing, not just affordable housing or not just really small housing, but kind of the range of housing. And folks wanted to ensure that it doesn't necessarily constrain the city's ability to, continue building great infrastructure and providing great services. And then the housing options and choices group, they talked a lot about accessory dwelling units and middle housing as important kind of routes to housing choice, and kind of a nice way of increasing density in sort of a moderate way within existing neighborhoods. Again, there's some concerns about compatibility with sort of existing character of neighborhoods, and pointed out the fact that not just concerned about changing character, but also just neighbor opposition or neighborhood opposition, and how education and outreach are really important components of implementation there, and sort of sharing more information about the housing need in Lake Oswego and why it's really important to increase housing choices, even in sort of developed existing areas. This group also talked about preparing underutilized land for development, which could take a variety of forms, or that could be implemented through a variety of strategies, but how that is particularly important for affordable housing development. This group also talked about a desire or a need for more immediate solutions, and not just strategies that would be implemented over many, many years, but things that could have more of an impact in the near term. And then also opportunities for more home ownership and affordable home ownership. So not just rentals, but also ownership options. And then lastly, the group that talked about seniors and people with disabilities, they thought that a tax abatement strategy has potential, and pointed out that tax abatements can really be essential to making subsidized housing projects feasible. They also talked about ways to encourage smaller housing units, and the need for more options, especially for seniors that are looking to downsize. And they pointed out that even condos can be quite expensive, so there's a need for more affordable, smaller housing options. Also discussed cottage clusters and how they can be a great solution for seniors and a really appealing housing option that can fit into existing neighborhoods. But they did point out that a couple proposals in Lake Oswego have faced pretty serious neighborhood pushback, and how that's kind of a major stumbling block for cottage cluster development so far. At least it has been so far. This group also talked about incentives for accessibility features, and they seem to support that strategy. And then also ways to add density to the town center and to the city's main corridors, because these are areas that have great proximity to services and to transit. And those are areas that really make sense for seniors to live and live in smaller units and also have, walkable access or transit access to the services that they need. So that's kind of a quick summary of what we heard from the task force. I think there will be even more to talk about at our next set of meetings when we have, I know Jessica's going to talk about next steps, but we'll have our evaluation report where we go into a little bit more depth about each of these strategies that we'll be considering, talking more about potential impact on housing production, sort of the relative feasibility of various strategies, and some other considerations. So I think we're not really taking anything else off the list at this point. We're kind of keeping things in the list, but we're sort of starting to prioritize strategies based on the feedback we've gotten so far. And with that, I'll pass it back to Jessica.
Thanks, Kate. So this next phase of the project is exciting. So this is where we're going to refine the list of housing strategy options, and this is going to happen over the next several months. And as you can see here, we have a couple more meetings with the task force coming up in February and March, as well as community outreach in March. And then based upon this feedback, it will culminate into a preferred list of strategies that are going to be presented to the City Council and the Planning Commission at a joint study session in April. And that will be an opportunity for the Commission and Council to provide further direction to staff. And then after we receive that direction, the next phase of the project will be to draft the actual housing production strategies report, and that will be completed in June and ready for review by the task force and the Planning Commission in June. And then the City Council will then have a study session in July, and the public hearings with the Planning Commission and the City Council will happen later on this fall. So we are making significant progress on this and are at a pretty significant milestone now in the project. And as I mentioned before, since this is an update, there's no particular action or anything that we're asking for the commission tonight. But just one more opportunity, if you have any questions, feedback, comments, that is the end of our presentation.
I just had one. How are you going to be doing the survey that's due, I think it was March 14th? What process are you going to use for that?
Kate, do you have any an answer for that at this point? I know that Eric and I haven't discussed that specifically.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that as a team yet. I think it's a little bit tricky to ask questions about potentially quite complicated topics. Each of these housing strategies is pretty complicated. So the surveys that we've done in the past have been trying to keep it sort of higher level. So asking questions that folks, can understand and have an opinion on, not trying to get too far into the details, but still trying to ask things that can meaningfully provide direction to decision makers. So it's a tricky, it's a tricky balance. Yes. So we will be working on that over the next couple months and figuring out a good strategy for that.
Other questions? We got a pretty simple one. The April 2nd joint meeting. Do you know what day of the week that is? Is that a Monday or?
Tuesday.
It's a Tuesday. I think.
It seems to me you must have already talked about this, but when I look at all these different topics concerning housing needs, you must have at the very beginning talked about what the goal for all this is. There are some central goals. Are those outlined anywhere?
Yeah, the housing needs analysis, sorry to interrupt, if you wanted to finish your thought, sorry.
No, I'm just curious. I mean, you have here a listing of things that are all pointing towards an increase in housing, and in particular, specialized housing. That is, it's less costly and so forth like that. And also the availability of land to do that on. So what I'm looking for is, because I haven't been on this committee except for about 4 months, is I keep waiting to somehow get a feeling, where is this aimed at, though? What is the city trying to accomplish here? Is that articulated, let's say, at the very beginning of all this?
It was, and we did the housing needs analysis. That was the first report that the staff and the consultants worked on, and the commission adopted in, I believe it was in or the commission recommended adoption, and I believe it was adopted by the council in October. And that housing needs analysis talked about what our gaps are going to be in the city over the next 20-year horizon. And so we really need all levels of housing in the city, including upper income housing, but a particular need is for affordable housing well, basically all housing types. I should just stopped with that. So, so the housing needs analysis is really sets the goals and what we're trying to achieve, and it tells us where we are lacking in the next 20 years in terms of housing. Oh, Kate, if you want to add anything to that, but.
Not much to add, but yeah, I think Jessica said it well, that you need all types of housing. You need the full sort of income range. You need housing choices. You need more housing choices than you have today. And in particular, you need more affordable housing options and sort of moderate cost housing options. And then I think the contextualized housing needs helps kind of break it up or break it out a little bit more, and identify, housing needs for specific populations, like people with disabilities, people of different ethnic and racial backgrounds, historically marginalized groups. So that, I think that is where we have identified, sort of the range of housing needs that are needed in the city, and that the housing production strategy is working to work towards. So if that hasn't been presented in a clear way, we can kind of make a note of that and make sure that the goals and the needs are very clearly sort of laid out as part of the housing production strategy.
I think if you take a look, if you can read through the contextualized housing needs assessment that was included in your packet, that sort of ties together the housing needs analysis with the production strategies, and I think that will make it clearer.
Looks like we're out of questions. So so thank you, Kate and Jessica, for your presentation, and we'll move on to the next steps.
Thank you.
All right. So I guess in the agenda we'll move to other business. We have anything for that? Okay. Next will be schedule review.
I just want to remind the commission that the Boards and Commissions Summit is happening this Thursday. It's going to be at the Adult Community Center here on, I think it's G Avenue, and it starts at 6 p.m. and it will end around 7:30 p.m. They are opening up a little bit early at 5:30 if you want to come for any networking or socializing, so you're welcome to come a little early. So hopefully you all can make it. And then your next meeting, which will be on January 22nd, is a joint meeting with the Development Review Commission. And this is to review an early draft of the Urban and Community Forestry Plan. I believe that was distributed to you on December 29th or early last week. So you should have that plan to review. It is a little bit lengthy, so I wanted to give you a little bit extra time. You will have in your packet this week a memo that will kind of help provide a little more context and a little more direction on what you might look at when you're reviewing that plan. And I know it's going to be a little tricky for the Planning Commission to review this because the tree code is not a land use regulation. It's not something that you're used to reviewing. And the Urban and Community Forestry Plan is more of it's kind of a comprehensive document that takes into account all of the plans in the city that regulate our urban, or that have policies for our urban forest. Again, not something that this commission typically deals with, but we do have the Healthy Ecosystems chapter in our comprehensive plan, which is under your purview. And so I would suggest there are some information in there about trees, and this is also referenced in the Urban and Community Forestry Plan. So I would encourage you to take a look at that Healthy Ecosystems chapter, and I can send you a link to that. And then when you're doing your review, maybe focusing on the strategic plan part of things, and again, I'll go over this in my memo, might be a good strategy for you because it is a big document and can be a little bit overwhelming, especially when you may not be familiar with a lot of the plans or policies that are discussed in there. I will note that we will be talking about the tree code, but this plan does not result in any changes to the tree code at this point. That will be a separate effort, and I think that will come up with that might come up with the DRC during the discussions. So we'll make it abundantly clear that while this Urban and Community Forest Plan is an important document as a policy basis for any changes to the tree code, we are not making any changes to the tree code at this time. That will come with a later effort, I suspect a little bit later this year. On February 12th, you will have a public hearing on the annual Community Development Code amendments, and you recently had a study session in early December on those, so that will be the public hearing. And then there will be an update on stormwater code amendments in your second meeting in March. I do want to let you know that, or remind you that Manager Olson is out through the remainder of January. He will be back in February. He is sort of phasing his parental leave, so he's going to be obviously there early on, and then we'll take some more time later on in the year. So if you do have anything to come up or you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly in Eric's absence, but he will be back for your February meetings. And that's all I have for the update.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, I think we are adjourned. Whoop.
I just had one technical
Back up.
question. I've got on our little LO thing here, right? It said that the survey is open now for people to kind of go online and answer. So is that information then put together with the information that we got this week, which I guess was more kind of targeted different districts within the city? How do the two different surveys come together?
So the city conducts this community survey every 2 years. So the last one was in 2021, and the way that they've set it up is they'll do a statistically significant survey, and that's where they get a statistically significant sampling throughout the city, and that's what the last report is based on. So that made sure we got viewpoints from everyone throughout the city, geographically as well as demographically, so that the findings of that part of the survey are final. Then they also open it up just to the general public for anyone to answer the same questions, but those results will be separate because they're not technically statistically significant. But they'll review, the council will review the results of both. Now that survey, the one that is not statistically significant, that's just open online right now, closes on January 26th. So we won't have those results until after the Boards and Commissions Summit. So we won't be considering that as part of the upcoming summit this Thursday.
All right, thanks. We're adjourned.